We acknowledge the original owners of the land on which we podcast, whose stories were told for thousands of years. Today, we are recording in Meanjin. We pay our respects to elders past and present who may be listening. Sovereignty was never ceded. A quick note before we get started that there may be some swearing in today's podcast. If you don't like swearing or usually listen with children in the car, you have been warned. This episode of What in the NDIS Now is brought to you by Astolti. Astolti is the software solution for NDIS professionals, built by NDIS professionals. It's my go-to software, and it's trusted and loved by hundreds of other NDIS providers. I love how easy it is to use, keeping all my participant information, notes, and invoicing in one place, available anytime from any device. Astolti are currently building out their scheduling platform after 4 years in the making. If you provide core supports and are looking for a scheduling platform to meet your needs, head to astolti.com.au/rostering waitlist. We're proud to be sponsored by Tyre Nuts, Brisbane's tyre fitting shop with a powerful purpose. Tyre Nuts is a leading social enterprise that creates real, full, award-wage jobs for people with disabilities without touching their NDIS funding. They make buying new tyres simple with an all-inclusive low price that covers the tyre, wheel balancing and wheel alignment. Get a great deal on your next set of tyres at Tyre Nuts. Book now at tyrenuts.com.au and follow their journey on Facebook and Instagram. You're listening to What in the NDIS Now, a podcast where I, Hannah Redford, and my friend Sam Rosenbaum interview participants and providers about all things NDIS. Hi Sam, how are you going?
I am going well, as always, thank you. Hannah, how about yourself?
I am doing well, although my 16-year-old who was in year 10 this year has already finished school for the year, so you might hear screaming and yelling in the background as they play whatever the heck it is that they're playing through with their friends on Discord.
Well, at least they're keeping engaged and not stepping on your toes too much.
Yeah. And it is only their friends. Like, yes, they use Discord, but we're very careful that it's just their people they know.
That's very good parental responsibility of you there, Hannah.
Far out. I try.
That's all we can do.
Yeah.
So today is a bit of a different podcast episode.
Yeah, but still important.
Absolutely, and a very good topic. So we have on today Gemma Hitchcock.
Hello, how are you?
Welcome to the podcast, Gemma.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure.
So as we always start the episode, where did you grow up?
I grew up in the Redlands, actually. So mine's a bit of a boring one. So I was born in the Redlands. I did all my schooling in the Redlands, and I've lived here my whole 30 years, and I will likely retire. And yeah, this will be probably where I stay.
From someone that has moved around more than my current age, I think that stability is almost something I'm jealous of.
Well, I always joke I did a short stint outside of the Redlands. I lived in Wakeley for a short period of time when my daughter was first born, and, yeah, something just keeps suckering me back in.
Well, it's a nice part of the world.
It is. It's lovely. If you like water, I'm not a big fan of sand or water, but that's okay. The points are nice to look at.
I love sand and water.
Same.
I'm a little bit jealous. I'm too much hinterland at the moment.
So, Gemma, how did you get into the disability sector?
I started when I was 18. So I sort of went through school and thought that I would know exactly what I wanted to do. I started out thinking I wanted to be a veterinarian, did science. Like, nope, that's not going to work for me. And then, yeah, as I sort of graduated, I wanted to do something helping people. My mum was already a support worker at the time, and at first I thought I wanted to do nursing. Again, not a big fan of needles, so I thought probably a no-go for me there. So I actually started working with my mum, working with a quadriplegic gentleman, again, local to the Redlands. And, it just sort of grew from there. So I spent probably a good 3-4 years working as a support worker doing personal cares, working with the same client, which was really lovely, going back to that whole stability thing. Apparently I don't love change. And then from there I sort of did more in-office-based stuff at Spinal. So worked as a receptionist, did some admin roles, particularly as the NDIS funding was going from, block funding to NDIS. I then ended up in the rostering team, which was amazing. Again, looking after people within the Redlands region. And then I fell pregnant with my daughter, so went on maternity leave for a short period of time there. When I come back, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do, so I thought, look, I'll give, Queensland Health a bit of a go. Did that for about a year and thought, nope, need to get back out into the community again, which sort of led me to actually receiving a phone call one day from one of my mentors when I worked at Spinal. And she said, would you be interested in doing sport coordination? And I thought, okay, yep, we'll give this a go. I was quite young still, and it was definitely a steep learning curve, but one that I was very, very grateful for. I think anyone who's done sport coordination can attest that you learn hard and fast.
Yeah.
So I did that for about 18 months and switched gears from spinal cord injury to mental health, which was a space that I found myself really, really passionate in. Unfortunately, did experience a little bit of burnout there. So, ended up working for a couple of years in business development and did service delivery for close to 13 years and have recently switched gears to allied health and, the creation of the Hunnybee as well.
Which is why we've got you on today, because we really wanted to talk about Hunnybee. And so tell us a little bit about where it all started and what it is.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I guess going back to, my support work years, working with somebody who had a spinal cord injury, I was 18, very, very young, very naive. And this particular participant was in a relationship, and I'd often find myself, having some of those intrusive thoughts thinking, how does this work? Like, how does all this go? And, through there, working through my career, and particularly more when I went into the psychosocial space, I found myself being asked a lot of questions. Can I go to this brothel? How can I meet somebody? How do I start interacting with people? I don't like to go outside. I, have social anxiety and those sorts of things. And quite often I would find myself, late at night after I'd finished going, okay, how can I support this person? And, you'd spend hours upon hours Googling things, and some things were really, really great. And then other things, you're just sifting through paragraphs upon paragraphs of stuff that just doesn't make sense. So I guess moving forward a couple of years, I was working with an organisation and started the PAIR project. This was a really, really great provider-focused, I would say, events where, we get different guest speakers in to be able to speak to their experience, and people also, living with a disability and all different areas of knowledge, lived experience. And that seemed to really spark something within me, but it was also resonating really, really well with the people who attended, and the feedback was constant. I just didn't think about this. I didn't know about this. I wouldn't even know where to start looking. So I suppose as I went more within the allied health realm in the past sort of 6 months, having that clinical backing has really been able to open up the doors to the Hunnybee. So the Hunnybee Collective is a website or a wellness hub, and it's filled with resources, webinars, there'll be workshops coming up, events, and it's all the exact same concept. Is we will often as providers say, we're person-centered or we're holistic, and everybody I think has the best intentions to be. But if you're not looking at a whole person, then realistically we probably aren't cutting the mustard when it comes to, supporting people in that space as a whole person.
Yeah. So where did the name come from?
So I have a very, very dear friend of mine down in Lismore who her and I work quite often when I come up with all my fancy names. So her and I sat back and forth a fair bit and went, okay, what makes sense here? So we're throwing around, obviously birds and the bees and, what will make sense. There is also, I don't know if many people cruise down Caxton Street very often, but in my younger years, there was a strip establishment named Honeybees, which, in my younger days, I used to possibly pop into every now and again. So I think sort of working and playing with those ideas and having a bit of fun with it, is where the Honeybee collective name come from. So very much it's a collective of different resources and information education pieces. But obviously just having a bit of fun with it too.
Yeah. And it's all about people with disabilities exploring sexuality.
Yes. So the whole purpose is for it to be an accessible and inclusive and safe place for people to be able to feel empowered and confident. It's all well and good to have events and things like that. But at the end of the day, some people aren't as liberal speaking about this. Support workers and clinicians aren't forward coming when it comes to asking these sorts of questions because it can be uncomfortable. People experience all different types of communication and different barriers and things like that. So just having a place where someone can either start exploring, explore further, or even just to give, providers, whether or not that be a support worker, a clinician, or even just a carer or family and friends to be able to go, okay, how can we start having this conversation?
Definitely a very important starting point.
Yes.
It's as you said, it can be awkward, it can be challenging, and it's almost a very socially taboo. And from the industry, even if you go back a couple of years when sex work's taking that off from participants.
Yes.
And that whole quite ugly commentary that almost chastised people with a disability that they do not deserve intimacy or relief.
Yep. No, 100%. And I think a lot of people, and this is stereotyping, not everybody, but a lot of people will think that someone living with a disability is usually asexual or it just doesn't cross their mind. And that's not the case at all. And I had a really interesting conversation with a mum quite recently where she said for her daughter had an intellectual disability. And for her, it was just getting through the day-to-day. So, trying to build her capacity to form routines. And, as she got older, trying to educate her around when she got her period and how that looks. And obviously there was particular challenges that came with that. And so even from a parent's point of view or a carer's point of view, this isn't something that they're forward thinking because all they're doing is just trying to get day to day. And, you fall into that sort of space. And someone living with a disability, it's not necessarily easy to say, hey, or even acknowledge or know why they're feeling this way. So that's something that I've definitely found whilst having these conversations with people is, it's so taboo and so secretive and hush-hush. And yet the second you start talking about it, everyone's like, I've wanted to mention this or I've wanted to ask this question, but I just haven't known how or where or who to. And it's quite interesting when you start really delving into it with people.
Yeah, because it turns out no matter what, humans tend to like sex, but also need touch.
Yes. Yeah, that's it. And a lot of people think that, when we talk about sexual health or wellness or well-being, that we're talking that very traditional, intercourse, penetration. And that's not the case. There's so many different ways that you can either explore yourself, build connection and intimacy with other people. It could be as simple as, just having a cuddle or, something like that someone doesn't necessarily put two and two together and go, okay, well, this is still part of my sexual journey or part of my intimacy routine or well-being, I suppose.
I think it's great that you have built this platform and that it has resources for everyone, because as you say, also not everyone knows the questions to ask, you know?
Yes.
Which can also be really tricky, because when it's such a taboo topic, which it is kind of silly that it is such a taboo topic. And, you know, you as someone who's currently pregnant with twins, you know, we know how they got there, you know.
Over here.
Like, it is funny to me how this sort of, how people get so concerned about it.
Oh, definitely. And it's quite interesting, you know, when you sort of look, even speaking with, so I was very, very fortunate to work with Southern Cross University in creating this resource and, you know, the Wellness Hub and Hunnybee community. And I worked with a social worker very, very closely. And she, you know, was a few years older than I am. I'm currently 30. She was closer to her 60s. And while we were engaging and, you know, trying to create, even at times, let's be honest, trying to figure out how to create the Hunnybee Collective, you know, we'd have these different conversations around even different decades. Even if you take out the whole, you know, living with a disability part of things, it very much is a generational thing where, you know, back in the 40s and 50s, like, well, you wouldn't talk about this at all. And then obviously, you know, you come to sort of free love in, you know, 70s and 80s. And then when I suppose HIV was, you know, a really, really big thing back in those days, the 70s and 80s and 90s, it's sort of become quite a closed book again. And we're quite fortunate, I suppose, coming into now, you know, 2025, but even a bit before that. I mean, it was only a few years ago that people who identified as part of the LGBTQIASB plus community have been able to express themselves in a more safe environment. And even then, that's something that we're still working on. So I think even just looking at it generationally, this is something that, again, we all like to feel pleasure. We all like to, you know, feel closeness, connection. But I think just opening up this discussion again, and I think we are starting to become quite fortunate that we are in an era that it is a safe topic to start speaking about again, and it isn't as taboo. And we're hoping with the Hunnybee Collective that we can continue to keep those really open conversations, and not just about the cookie cutter stuff either. Like, consent is extremely important, of course, and, you know, how to have these conversations and hold professional boundaries, all extremely important conversations. But also looking into, you know, the things that are a bit different, looking into kinks and looking into, you know, different, I suppose, sexual social groups and clubs that people can really start to engage in working with people within even the sexual health and wellbeing community as well.
I think that's a really good point that you made, especially on the boundaries.
Yes.
And how support workers engage and start moving forward. Because forget the rest of the wider scope of support workers working directly, or anyone working or supporting directly a participant. And especially if you start thinking about adolescent males as well, when they start maturing, or and girls, as you mentioned before, with periods and that. A support worker, it can almost feel like we're crossing lines that almost could get us land in trouble. And because of that, the tendency is to skirt around or avoid the conversation in its entirety.
No, definitely.
And I think having the ability to open up these conversations actually then start supporting us as well to understand how we can engage with people with a disability and each other as ourselves.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I mean, you know, I'll giggle sometimes because even when we're doing something as simple as like an intake, or like you're saying, a support worker who is providing supports, we will ask about this person's bowel motions. We will ask about, you know, particularly if they are utilising a catheter or something like that, we will ask all of those really, quote unquote, intimate questions about someone. And yet for some reason, this one seems quite taboo. Obviously, there are a few different obstacles with this one. If someone doesn't have the capacity to understand that we're asking this question more for their health and well-being and how we can support their goals, then it can obviously go into a bit of a grey area. I mean, a big thing that I often will speak to providers about is their support workers. They'll see somebody, maybe they've accidentally walked into a participant's bedroom and haven't knocked or something and have witnessed that person pleasuring themselves. And more often than not, they'll actually put that in as an incident. Well, the way I look at it is it's no different if you were to live in a share house, which I'm sure many of us have in our lifetime, and you've gone to rock up to, your housemate's bedroom and you haven't knocked on the door and you've accidentally walked in on, two people having sex or, them pleasuring themselves, and most of the time you go, oh, my God, I'm so sorry, you close the door and hope to God it never got mentioned again. Whereas for some reason, because there is, I suppose, that level of fear, there seems to be, incidences written, and then it needs to involve all these stakeholders. And I mean, let's be honest, if someone's just playing with themselves, that's not unnatural. We all do it in one way or another. So, yeah, it's those sorts of things. I think that we really need to start considering we are people supporting people at the end of the day. And what you do behind closed doors is up to you. Same goes for the people that we support.
I think when I have heard it be an incident is when I've had a few who might try and pleasure themselves in public or out in the lounge room instead of in their bedroom. And that's where we've got to, put on our adult pants and go, hey, this is great and you're totally allowed to do that, but there's a time and a place, and this is neither the time nor the place,
Yes, no, and you obviously there are, we've all worked in the sector, I think, for quite a few years between the three of us, and I think we've all had experiences. I remember I supported somebody who, I believe they were a paraplegic actually at the time, and I'm hesitant to say the word dedicated to what they were doing, but for this I'm going to use the word dedicated, and used to throw themselves out of their wheelchair and would army crawl and try and look up support workers' skirts. Now that's not appropriate, and I think with the Hunnybee what we're trying to achieve here is to go, okay, well, obviously this person is having some sort of desire. How can we, as a multidisciplinary team and working with stakeholders, when it's those sorts of more extreme scenarios, how can we still support this person to hopefully satisfy them, but in a way that's safe and appropriate and isn't going to put anybody, themselves or the staff they're supporting them, in harm's way?
Yeah, absolutely. And I really love that. And I love that there are resources there about also staying safe in terms of, STDs and STIs, and also in terms of pregnancy, because those, pregnancy may not be always wanted. And also we really have to, beyond the extremes of HIV, neither do you want to get any of the other STDs or STIs that are available.
Yes, no, definitely. And I think even with that, it's also looking at, so one that we created was around medication. So medication and how it can affect somebody's, sexual desires or, how things can feel for someone. And the reason I bring that up is because something as simple as a vitamin, say St. John's wort, for example, can lead to unwanted pregnancies. And that's something that's as simple as off the shelf. You think you're doing the right thing for your own mental health, and yet now you're in a predicament that you never expected. Obviously, for a lot of the people we support, they're on, a plethora of different medications. And so it's sort of looking at those sorts of things as well. And as I was saying before, we didn't want cookie cutter resources. On the website, we have a sex worker who has been able to explain how can you appropriately ask for a service, essentially. We've got dating and socializing tips, like all the things that I suppose are really relevant and prevalent now as well. Online dating is a huge thing. We all, maybe not we all, but a lot of us have been down the online dating journey. I'm sure we've all got our own horror stories. I was very fortunate. I found my partner on Hinge, and here I am, pregnant with twins and about to pop. But not everybody has that positive experience. And so working with someone and going, okay, well, this is how you can put up, your really lovely photos. You don't have to disclose that you're living with a disability, and, just going through those really almost back to square one steps to be able to make someone feel really safe and confident. So as I said, it's not just about sex. It's also finding connection, intimacy as well.
I think that's really good. I want to step back a little bit earlier into that conversation where you were talking about that gentleman jumping out of his chair and sort of trying to climb and look up a dress, because it really identifies that there's the unmet need. And what it's demonstrating is that the systems and the support networks aren't actually understanding or respecting that individual's personal and individual growth and body development. And the real need for us as the support providers and people in that circle to be able to really understand and facilitate how that conversation happens and work with that person to identify what is actually they're wanting and how to support it.
Yes, definitely. And I think particularly with that, this is where we do fail a lot as providers, and that's across the board, where quite often what will happen in those sorts of situations is an incident report will be written, it will be escalated if needed. That particular support worker is taken off shift permanently, and then it's just left at that. And then in the back end, there'll be notes, FYI, this person,
I think it's lucky to be left at that. Sometimes it feels that they chastise that individual for doing that and not recognising the need that's being asked for.
Yeah, and I think that is where a lot of us providers across the board are failing, because that's it. And then it's just a big warning. Be warned, maybe wear pants next time. Whereas what we need to start doing, and this is why I think another really, really great function of the Hunnybee Collective is working with people who are experts in this space. So that was the other part of the provider finder that's on there, is working with people who truly understand, such as a positive behaviour practitioner or a social worker or an occupational therapist, and finding people who can really delve into why this is occurring. But not only that, how can, as we said, support this person to still have their needs met, but do it in a space that creates safety and confidence for everybody involved.
I think that's really important. And like, I was just thinking as you were talking that, like, I wouldn't know what to do if I walked into a strip club. And
yeah, no, me either.
So if I was to support someone, that becomes tricky because, I have no idea what to do. And so, having something that sort of says, this is typically how it goes, this is what you're looking at, I'd probably ask someone else to do it, because I'm probably not the right person, since I haven't been in a strip club. So, and similarly, like you said, in a brothel, and what happens, and even that is fairly tricky, because each place is going to be slightly different and do things slightly differently, and you're not necessarily going to, the Bunny Ranch in Nevada or something where they just parade all the sex workers out for you.
Yeah.
So, and then knowing, well, how much do you pay for this? And should I offer an amount? Do they offer, say how much it's going to cost? And, that's something that all works towards the unknown and making it scary to go to places like that.
Oh, definitely. And I suppose two parts to that. one thing that I always, as much as I am obviously very liberal and very passionate about this particular topic, I also really, really try to preface with people, this is not something that I'm saying every single person should rock up to a client's house and go, you know what, let's start talking about sex. We all have our own personal points of view. We all have our own values, our morals. You know, we've also got to consider people's own lived experiences. So this isn't necessarily for everybody. I suppose that was another big thing with the Hunnybee is if you've got a client who is expressing these sorts of, you know, desires or asking these sorts of questions, it is okay to actually say, you know what, I'm not the right person to be working with you. I would love to be able to help you further. Maybe have a look at this particular, you know, website, maybe speak to these particular providers. And then if someone still feels really uncomfortable, it is okay to say, look, I just don't think maybe we're going to work well together. That's completely fine. When it comes to, as you were saying before, you know, not having that knowledge and experience for people that are wanting to help and support someone in that space but haven't necessarily done it themselves, I think it is very, very valuable to have something to be able to have a look. And, you know, there's when you're going to an establishment, even asking them, there's probably only 2 or 3 in, I suppose, like the Brisbane area. So you've got Clio's and Platinum 195. They're the only 2 physically accessible establishments that can support someone living with a disability. And then, again, you've probably only got another 5 that have staff there who have provided their services and actually have that knowledge around servicing someone living with a disability. You know, a sex worker does not know how to transfer someone. A sex worker does not know how to do a lot of these things. So then it's, okay, well, what can the sex worker and the support worker do together that's professional and still keeping boundaries for this person to still enjoy their time? So, yeah, there's many, many different things that'll, I suppose, play a part in that as well that you wouldn't even think about.
Yeah. I know one question I was asked once was, what should the support worker do while the participant is in with the sex worker, you know, and should they be paid for that time? And my thoughts were, well, in that example, say someone's needing to be hoisted, you know, into a bed by the support worker, and then the support worker leaves the room and waits, you know, in some waiting room or in their car or whatever.
Yeah.
For, you know, the hour or 2 to be up, and then they've got to hoist again. I think they should be paid for that time because they're not able to go on any other shift. You know, they are having to wait there in case the person needs the hoist again.
Yep, definitely. And I think, you know, particularly when you're looking at establishments, and these rates are just approximate, but you're looking at about, for 30 minutes, roughly about $90 to $100. For about 45 minutes, you're looking at about $120. And then for 60 minutes, you're looking at about $150. Realistically, that's a lot of money for even an hour. I mean, I'm sure we'd all love to get paid $150 an hour. So you're right. It is very, very hard for someone to then be rostered somewhere else, or, you know, when realistically most people are only going to be looking for that hour, particularly when we're talking about people we support who are generally on the DSP or aren't able to work full-time hours. And then you do hear of experiences where someone goes in, a lot of the time, from the feedback I've heard and received, this is actually someone's first time engaging in intercourse. And so there can be that fear factor as well, that maybe they thought that this is something they really wanted to do. Halfway through, they've gone, you know what, it's not exactly what I thought. And then someone has had to step in and go, okay, well, you know, let's go home and, you know, debrief on this if you feel comfortable doing so.
I think that ability to be able to debrief and work through that's a very nuanced sort of process. And you've got to have a lot of trust with both yourself as a support worker and the participant with you, and the participant with their kind of intimacy and communication type as well. How that flows needs to be really, really safe.
Definitely. And you will find more often than not, it isn't just some random support worker who's filling in a backup shift who is supporting someone through this process. It is usually their main, their favorite, whatever word you want to use there, support worker that will be supporting someone, to explore themselves in this journey further.
It definitely opens up some very good questions on how providers and even independent support workers can start to look at asking these questions, capturing it on forms, and then I suppose also looking at how we train staff. I remember there was a support worker I used to work with. He was an independent. I was working with a young gentleman who, when he would get heightened or in towards the evenings, they would send him to bed. They would send him off to bed. But to get him to regulate down, the process for it was that the support workers would you'd sort of cuddle.
Yep.
And then that would, when he started to go through puberty, that's where the issues started to occur. And that co-regulation for him to be able to sleep became more of a problem for that staff member with the behaviours that were coming on, because it's a female support worker with a young adolescent male.
Yes.
And the attachment and the connection, while earlier might have been needed for that regulation, started to then become a whole heap of a different scenario and a different challenge.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think you're right. There does need to be a lot more training and education with staff, particularly at the beginning of their employment process with any, support work provider. It isn't something that probably seems as important or relevant, I'm sure, to a lot of organisations. But we tend to work very reactively, other than proactively, within the disability sector, which, has its pros and cons, however you want to look at it. But when you do start to get into those really tricky situations, I think a lot of providers who have had to do major incidences before, when it's come to sexualised behaviours, probably would have preferred their staff to have been a bit more confident in this space earlier than now having to do the 30, 40 hours that it takes to be able to, close this incident and work with all the stakeholders and doing all the things that need to be done to make sure that everyone's safe here. I'm the first person to admit I have no clinical background in this. I have no quote-unquote tertiary qualifications in this. This is purely 13 years worth of experience across the board. But I suppose the really, really good thing with the Hunnybee and just in general how we should be working is that collaborative kind of approach. I find that word gets thrown out a lot, but it really is working in a team who have the expertise, who have the lived experience, who bring all of their strengths to the table to be able to support this one person.
Yeah. I think it's great that you have been able to bring a lot of expertise. And this is something that I really love and look for in other humans, and is those who know what they don't know. You've looked for experts because you've gone, I know what I know from lived experience, but what I don't have is that sort of backing of some degree. Not that you even have to, but I think that it's great that you've gone to a university and said, hey, this is what I'm doing. Can you give me a hand? And found other experts that will help you along the way so that you're not just going, oh, yeah, this is just me and I know everything.
Yeah, no, definitely not. I mean, we've got Southern Cross University, Northcote, Touching Base. For anyone who doesn't know Touching Base, it's essentially sex worker Refidex. They are predominantly within Sydney, New South Wales region, but brilliant organisation led by volunteers. Amazing if you need to, look into that a bit further. Alula, incredible. That's more like your support coordination sort of background in this as well, and service delivery, and then Spinal Life Australia. So the organisations that were really, really interested in this all, again, bring their own strengths. And I mean, it's easy for anyone to sit behind a computer and, type into ChatGPT, how can I speak to my participant about X? That isn't what I wanted this to be. It needed to be evidence-led, so that way we were ensuring that the resources that were going to hopefully be used weren't just sort of what a lot of people would see as common sense, which can also be hard to find these days. But that's a whole other story for a whole other time.
This episode is brought to you by Provider Advisory Service. What if your next audit wasn't just about compliance, but about people? Introducing the Provider Optimization Pathway, a 2-meeting diagnostic that transforms how NDIS, aged care, and health providers lead, engage, and grow. POP dives deep into leadership, workforce, and consumer experience, revealing what's working, what's missing, and what's possible. It's not just a report, it's a roadmap to build a resilient, people-first organisation where your team thrives and your clients feel the difference. Go to provideradvisory.au, no .com, just provideradvisory.au for more information. This episode was made possible with thanks to the support of Plan Decoders. Plan Decoders are NDIS experts. We are here to help participants, carers and families understand the NDIS and get the most out of their NDIS plan. Make an appointment for a Plan Decoders session if you want to understand your NDIS plan, understand your funding, find out more about what services and supports are available to NDIS participants, understand the NDIS in general, prepare for a plan review, or get any questions you have about the NDIS answered. If you or someone you know could use some support from Plan Decoders, contact me, Hannah, by heading to plandecoders.com.au.
So while intimacy and sex is kind of a big part of what you're trying to support, that it does lead into relationships, and intimacy and relationships are a really key thing, but intimacy, relationships and sex are not always connected as well. How can staff, or how can we kind of look at supporting participants or people with a disability in general to kind of work out from a intimacy base, whether it's a relationship they're craving or if it's the touch or the desire for sexual relief?
Yeah, no, really good question. So I think it sort of starts, again, at the very basics. So are they looking for companionship or are they looking for pleasure? And a good way to find that out is to have a look at the people that are already in that person's life. So have they got a really solid friendship basis? Are they attending, social gatherings? Do they find themselves really struggling with some social isolation and things like that? I think starting there, you're able to then start to establish, okay, well, if you've got, say, a really great friendship basis, are you looking to be able to include someone who's in your life a little bit more? Or again, have you had thoughts about exploring things with your friends that, you probably wouldn't do with that person, but would do with somebody else, for example? I think a lot of the time we overthink these things as well. As staff, we may hear, hey, I'm feeling a little bit lonely. So instantly we tend to go to, oh, well, we need to get you into a group activity. And I think starting to look at it more from, okay, well, who's in your life currently? What are your future goals? Are you looking, do you have any plans of ever getting married, or are you wanting to explore X, Y, Z? And I think it's just asking those questions that you'd ask anyone else, really. It sort of helps to start build a really good framework around, okay, well, say, for example, someone says, I've got great friends, but I think I want to start a relationship with someone. Okay, well, how would you want to do that? Do you want to go to a bar and try and pick someone up? Do you want to try online date? Like providing options. And again, we'll often throw out choice and control. As staff, we aren't here to tell someone how they engage in that. You can give all the options in the world and then let that person decide and then support them along that journey. If it is just physical, you tend to pick it up pretty quickly because they go, I don't know, I really want someone around all the time, or I don't really want to talk to someone constantly. Then you can start going, okay, well, what does this look like for you? Do you want to go out and see if you meet someone, have a one-night stand? Do you want to explore, an escort or a brothel? Or do you have a friend that maybe you guys have discussed things a bit on the spicier side? So it all just varies. again, it's very individualized, dependent on a person's lived experience, their diagnosis, the capacity of that particular person. It's hard to answer fully without being vague, but it is very individual to that person.
I think that's an awesome answer, and I really like it, even if you're concerned it's vague, because it kind of needs to be, because there's, as many different scenarios as there are humans. And so you can't say, if yes, then follow this path, and if no, follow this path. It doesn't work
it's
like that.
No standard operating procedure.
Right.
I can't draw up an SOP flowchart.
No, as much as I would love to be able to provide that for everyone, unfortunately, that's not something that the Hunnybee Collective will or can ever provide.
Which brings us to that time in the episode where we ask you, in your ideal world, what would the future of the NDIS look like?
Goodness, that's a bit of a loaded question. I better put my PR hat on here. So,
give us a raw unfiltered, Gemma.
No. I will keep a slight filter on this one. Look, I mean, again, working with people living with disability for 13 years, we've really stopped looking at a person, is how I feel. Over the years, you see it more and more. We're looking at how we can keep this level of funding, how we can keep this person supported, but without looking at the person I'm sure we've all heard it. We've probably all said it. You need to tell the NDIS your absolute worst day. And I think that's really sad that we have to say that. Needed at times, but sad. So I think if we can start to move back towards that individualized approach where people are being, quote unquote, assessed, if we're looking purely from the NDIS point of view, on their needs and their real life experiences, as opposed to that tick and flick sort of job. I think the current system is moving a little bit too much towards that black and white. And as we've just established, we're human beings. We're all grey. We all have our different days, different moods, different needs, whatever that may look like. And that's not just talking about sexuality either. And we really aren't reflecting, I think, very well anymore people's complexities and what people need. Particularly, I suppose, coming back to sexual health and sexuality, there are supports and services out there for people living with a disability that they genuinely do need, that may not fit into that quote unquote, typical support that a lot of other people can have or need. So, and making sure that these needs, they are valid and people do deserve to be recognised as a human being overall, and that does obviously include their sexual health, well-being, their journey, exploration, whatever that looks like for that person. So sorry, I suppose to summarise that, just a more flexible needs-based type of assessment, looking at a whole person, looking to actually achieve better outcomes, not just, how do we make sure that this person doesn't just lose half their funding for the sake of this OT and this physio and this support worker and this and that report just don't all match. And
I love it. I think that's that's probably one of my more favourite responses. So in the recent ones, because it's bring it back to the person, which is what we're all about in the sector.
Yeah, that's it. We always say we're person-centred and we're this and that, but a lot of the time, realistically, we're not. We're all trying to do our best because we do have some pretty shitty restraints on us and they seem to be getting worse and worse. But I think we're just starting to lose that sense of humanity and humility. And I think if we can try and bring that back in a little bit, maybe that's all sparkles and rainbows from my point of view. But yeah.
I love the optimism, Gemma.
I try.
Now, I would really like you to spell honeybees, because you've spelt it in a really original way so that people aren't accidentally buying weed or going to a strip club. So could you say how you spell it, and then we will get out of here?
Yes. I'll often joke with people, I'm like, look, it's really not a bad day, whatever you Google. But to get to the Hunnybee Collective, so it's the THE, Hunnybee, one word, HUNNYBEE, Collective. COLLECTIVE.com.au.
And it is a fantastic resource and website, and you should go check it out if you haven't already.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you so much, Gemma, for coming on for this very important conversation.
Yeah.
Anytime. Have a wonderful day.
All right.
Huzzah!
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening. Please share with people you know. Until next time, as the Green Brothers say, don't forget to be awesome.